Hey guys, Lumen02. I got a rare opportunity today to play two formats all in one that I truly enjoy, including Old School, 93-94, and 100 card Singleton or Highlander. So I'm playing a Highlander Old School legal deck. So it does have power cards in it, unlike standard Highlander would. We'll go through a deck tech at the end on this deck because it's quite the monstrosity of 5-color control, and kind of how I came to my conclusion. I thought it would probably be one of the better decks if I was only able to play one card of each from, excluding basic lands, in 93-94. We're playing against a beginning 93-94 deck of blue-green flying men. This hand's not phenomenal on the play, or it's not phenomenal by any standards, but it's got all of the colors that it could possibly need, with the exception of green, which is the lightest splash for only a couple of cards in the deck, to include, I believe, Drop of Honey, Crumble possibly in the main, and then Regrowth. That said, it has long-term advantage with Jame Day Tome, and it has one half of a combo in the form of Stasis, so that if I draw into the Time Elemental, or a couple combo pieces that work with Stasis, I could possibly go that route with the hand. But again, it's just an extremely aggressive deck, not a great opener, but I figure on a 100-card Singleton 93-94 deck list, I'm probably not going to get better, because essentially what this deck is a combo, it's control prison deck is how it functions, because I think that for control prison, I think the card pool that's available in 93-94 best supports it if you have to play in Singleton. So that's kind of my rationale. I think if you were to try to play an aggro deck in this format, you just have a lot of bad cards. Like you'd have Mons' Goblin Raiders, etc., in your red-green deck. So my opponent has, a pretty fast start. They're beaten down. I do have Wrath of God here, which is a great pickup. So he giant growths his Atlanta Werewolves, starts beating down like his deck's basically intended to do. I kind of get greedy here, and it's possibly wrong. I actually go for Jame Day Tome because I do the math, and I figure that if he has giant growth that he cannot berserk and giant growth and kill me, he can put me very close. He can do 10 with one of his two threats, likely the the Lana Werewolves, and then 1 damage with the Scrib Sprites, which would put me to 1. So I think it was the right call to hold off on the Wrath of God there, because I think it's more likely that he plays a Serendib, a freed out, and possibly another threat, or pumps a couple times. It puts me really low on life, but allows me to Wrath of God and kind of, get back into the game with this Tome that I want to resolve first. As it stands, I'm kind of glad I got the Tome online regardless. Time Twister is kind of a beating here because it does take away my game plan. However, Tome is probably has more long-term importance, especially in a deck that's only playing Singleton copies of cards, because I'm going to need to draw out of the dead cards that I have in my control prison deck. But it also means my opponent is on a ton of mana. So at this point, I do go ahead and drop the Winter Orb, because I think it's important that I lock down their mana so they cannot, combo kill me, essentially, for lack of better terms, with the pump spells. They go ahead and play Icy Manipulator, which is actually extremely frustrating because it's extremely good against Winter Orb. However, it also means that we're both going to get to untap every time they use it. So if they go ahead and use it here on their turn, or on my end step, then that means I get to use Jame Day Tome and untap on my next step. I do go ahead and draw here with Jame Day Tome because I think I have to find some way to deal with Icy Manipulator. I draw into Sylvan Library and Sinbad. Sinbad is going to be a blocker here, even though it's a great combo with Sylvan Library. They tap down my threat, and they bash. So I go ahead and block the Lana Werewolves here because I don't think I have time to be Sinbadding. And there are certain cards they could have, on this draw that, if it's not creatures and it's pump they're probably still going to win, but there are some combinations of cards, especially at an odd life total there, that would warrant me doing that to stay, not dead. So I do find a Demonic Tutor off of the Sylvan Library here, and I'm able to get my Wrath of God online, which means that now my opponent, is going to have to determine, when and where they want to tap my Winter Orb. They actually go to tap a land here, which I'm fine with because I'm the one that I think is benefited by it. It means we stay at mana parity because they're tapping 1 just to tap something with an Icy Manipulator, which is fine by me. I think they probably need to untap my Winter Orb a little earlier in the game to get after me. Tabernacle is actually a great draw, but because I'm able to find a land with Sylvan Library every turn, eventually I'm going to find a way to get myself advantage because I'll be able to find land drops. Tabernacle is going to be a good one at some point, but probably not now. I go ahead and attempt a time walk here. It gets counterspelled. I allow that to happen because time walk was essentially just going to be an explore here. They play a flying man out, which I tend to be fine with. I think I have to accept it. I do go ahead and draw here. They tap down my City of Brass. I know I'm drawing Fireball, so I'm fine with the Flying Men. I'll use the Fireball to deal with that. I also have Tabernacle, which is going to mean that if they want to try to fight me over this, one, I'll get to mana drain them, which is not horrendous, and two, which means I'll probably get another James Day Tome activation, and two, I have mana drain to fight back. So I think that was the stronger line, is to let that resolve, just in case they have something like, a Serendib or something like that. You go ahead and draw here. Get a full untap. Find Seer Angel, which is a great threat. One of the few threats the deck runs, so I go ahead and play it out here. I also play out the Royal Assassin as well, because I think, even though I have Tabernacle, I do have 2 Moxens, so I'm going to at least get to untap at least once a turn. They go ahead and tap that down. I actually don't use the other remaining 3 mana to James Day Tome, because it's obviously bad with Winter Orb, and I don't want to lock myself out of casting the mana drain. I draw a Counterspell for the turn and get to look at 2 more. I keep the Mox Pearl because under Tabernacle and Winter Orb, having some artifact mana is going to be very imperative. I actually do go to counter the Berserk because I want to safeguard this Seer Angel, because right now, if I don't have a threat, then they're going to be able to very slowly, every 2 turns, essentially plink me for 1 damage off the City of Brass, which is a liability with the Icy Manipulator on the board. So they do as we expect, because we essentially have a faster clock than they do with 5 power on the board, to include the Sierra. Find more lands. Not a huge concern because we still have the Counterspell available. And honestly, building up our mana base is not an issue, because how this is going to play out is, what we're kind of looking to do is Sylvan Library likely into some way to draw a significant amount of cards, and because their Icy Manipulator is kind of their win con right now, they're going to have to tap our Winter Orb down, which means we'll also get the untap with them, so they can plink with our City of Brass. Find the Abyss, which is not a horrendous find, and right now they've used Unstable Mutation to essentially very slowly kill my Seer Angel. But I'm just looking for time. Having Sylvan Library in play should benefit me. Even though they're playing a 4 of more consistent aggro deck, Sylvan Library over enough time is going to benefit me. And I'd rather keep the counter spell for something like Psionic Blast or direct damage, which is going to be less in their deck, but it's still not non-existent. So keep on making land drops. Disrupting Scepter is not a bad find, because on the turns they do go for the Icy Manipulator, I'll be able to eat a card out of their hand because I'll get the untap because of Winter Orb taps. But right now I'm just comfortable buying time, having the Seer Angel buy me time with the Icy. Chain Lightning's not a horrible find. They're not on red, so it means I do have some direct damage capability. I've already utilized the Fireball at this point, so I am going to have to Twister it back in, but I do have other creature threats. This deck is not it's not exactly like the deck where it solely has Fireball and a couple small win cons. It's got more than that. It's got a Mahmahodi or a Fat Man Jin and Shivan Dragon as well. So I pay the cost again for the Tabernacle here. Draw to the Birch, which is pretty bad in this case. I get very lucky and find both the Time Elemental and a Copy Artifact. Copy Artifact's going to be imperative to my game plan now, because they're forced to use their Icy on their turn, which means that I'm going to be able to get in with the Seer Angel and then utilize the Chain Lightning to kill them. I go ahead and tap my Winter Orb on their end step to get the untap, but at the same time keep them from getting the untap. Not that it would be relevant, they're on a ton of mana at this point in time. Go ahead and look at the top. I opt, 1 to attack and put them down to 3. Next, I play out my Disrupting Scepter, hoping that I can knock something relevant out of their hand, or more ideally, fetch a counterspell out of their hand. They have a counterspell in hand that they did not discard wisely to the Disrupting Scepter or in response to it, but my counterspell is able to get the job done and put them to 0 lives. So, that was this interesting game of 93-94. Me on a Highlander deck and my opponent on a more aggressive build, but a 4 of 60 card deck. But like I said, I mean, it's not a fault of the opponent. I don't think the deck we're playing is great, but they have a newer deck and they're newer on MTGO, and mistakes get made, and hopefully, at the same time, learning does as well. But really, I kind of wanted to cover this for more so entertainment, because I think the 100 card format and the old school format are both extremely awesome. And the reason I like both is because of the extreme range and viability of archetypes that are available in both. When you think about the range of what is playable and good in old school, it's pretty amazing. Obviously a little less so, I think, in 100 card, because the consistency of not having 4-ofs of like Bizarre Baghdad if you're Reanimator is kind of cumbersome. But both formats tend to be have extremely deep range. So I built this deck kind of in interest of trying it out. Probably untuned. Well, it's a 100 card list at that. But here's the list. It is essentially a card advantage, the best removal and card advantage cards that can be had, I think, in both formats. Obviously we have to get a little creative with removal. We have stuff like Thanos Coffin. You have Oubliette, Demonic Torment. Cards that don't see a ton of play in old school, although Thanos Coffin probably does in some decks. But I think are extremely playable when you're playing only Singleton versions of it. Also have a cool Drop of Honey in here. Chain Lightning, a card you would normally not see, in a controlled deck like this because of its ability to be tossed back at you. Spirit Link with bad art. Because it actually is good removal against some of the better threats in the format, to include Serendib Freet. And then, you have Disenchant, pretty ubiquitous to the format. Balance, just a powerful removal spell and, discard spell. Wrath of God, Moat, the Abyss, Control Magic, which I think is a great removal spell, plus 2-for-1 advantage. Old Man of the Sea, it can be 2-for-1 advantage in certain matchups, and I think it's worth a nod main deck. Just to get that value. We have some weird prison and combo elements as well. We already saw the Abyss and Moat, but we also have Stasis in here, which is a situational card at best. But when you combine it with Time Elemental, it becomes pretty solid. Now, typically speaking, these cards are both one or the other. Well, Time Elemental less so. Are going to be dead in your hand, so you're going to be relying on some of your other 2-for-1 advantage to buy you time so you can get into draw engines and eventually get to the combo. Because you don't have, a large volume of counter magic available when you're playing Singleton, you will tend to find, I think, in this format that you need to have more board control options. Thus, the nature of the deck having the Abyss, Moat, more removal, Psionic Blast, Demonic Torment, Oubliette, Royal Assassin even, which I think is not bad when you're playing this style of deck. Tear. So a significant amount of removal for threats, plus Swords to Plowshares, Disenchant, Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, Spirit Link. Land Tax is actually secretly probably one of the most potent cards in the deck because, one, it's a 5-color, 100-card deck, so consistency is not really going to be its hallmark. And getting this down early is certainly going to give you a strong amount of advantage. So very interesting deck, kind of cool to play it in Singleton. We also have Disintegrate, which rarely sees play because Fireball is so much better than it, at least in 93-94. Sideboard, some other cool fringe playable cards that rarely see play in actual 93-94. Barrel's Cage, This card is essentially removal, albeit very inefficient. Obviously, we don't always have Winter Orb draws. When we do have those draws, we have cards like Relic Barrier, which can do numerous things other than just tap Winter Orb, and then Icy Manipulator to kind of facilitate it. Additionally, Felden's Cane. Meekstone I think does see some fringe play in old school, but I think in a sideboard of a 100-card deck, it's actually a very strong option. Crumble, actually not main deck. Black Vice, strong in the control mirror. You have the blast package here, essentially, to include Flash Flood, which is good against some decks. Can get a Ball Lightning. And then Artifact Blast, which I think is great in certain matchups. Greater Aromancy and Circle Protection Red, because this deck, like the actual literal deck from old school, has trouble dealing with very efficient direct damage or knowing when and where to counter it. So these cards kind of help prevent that decision cycle. Shatter, Artifact Removal is good. Divine Offering gains you some much needed life and is good, and more Artifact Removal in the form of Detonate right here. That can actually do some fringe damage. So how does the deck win? Well, you saw one method, beating down with Seera Angel and then, bolting them with Chain Lightning. But realistically, it probably, wins through getting to one of its flagship threats, which is Mamahoti Djinn or Shivan Dragon or just Fireball or an X spell like Disintegrate. And then up until that point, just generating vast card advantage, through guys like Sinbad, Sylvan Library, James Day Tome, or any of the board control like Nevin Jarl's Disc, etc. So very cool kind of, fringe format of 93-94 Highlander, but also extremely fun. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the gameplay of this kind of unique 93-94 old school Highlander deck. Alright guys, enjoy and take care now.